Wild Justice, by Andrew Moratti 2023, Chapter 1, The Lone Survivor. Clyde rode into the small saloon town of Dusty Creek, the sun hanging low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. The town stood as a relic of the Old West, its weathered wooden buildings displaying the scars of time and the harsh elements. The once vibrant facades now faded, their paint chipped and peeled, telling stories of days gone by. The wooden boardwalk creaked under the weight of Clyde's horse as he made his way through the town, the sound echoing through the stillness of the air. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the tang of whiskey, wafting from the saloons that lined the main street. The town seemed quiet, with a few locals milling about, their faces worn and weathered like the buildings. A dog lazily napped in the shade, seeking refuge from the scorching Sunday. Clyde's keen eyes scanned the buildings, searching for any signs of life that could lead him to the Bones Gang, the outlaws responsible for the tragedy that had shattered his family. Dusty Creek held its secrets close, its silent streets hinting at the stories and whispers that lingered in the air. As he dismounted his horse and tied it to a weathered hitching post, an elderly man with a worn-out hat approached him. "Evening, stranger," the man greeted with a raspy voice. "Looking for a place to rest your bones?" Clyde nodded, appreciating the gesture. "I could use a room for the night." "Any recommendations?" The old man pointed toward a modest boarding house nearby. "That there's Mrs. Henderson's place. Ain't fancy, but it's clean and has a comfortable bed. Tell her Jeb sent you, she'll treat you right." "Thank you," Clyde replied, a hint of gratitude in his voice. He made his way to the boarding house, the familiar weight of his past weighing heavily on his shoulders. Inside the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson greeted Clyde with a warm smile. "Evening, stranger. Jeb said you might be stopping by. Got a room ready for you, if you're interested." Clyde nodded, handing her a few coins. "I appreciate it." After settling into his room, Clyde's eyes were drawn to the wanted posters adorning the wall. His heart skipped a beat as he spotted the familiar faces of Brian Carter and the Bones Gang, their crimes and the rewards for their capture prominently displayed. The reward for Brian Carter was a staggering $20,000, a fortune that could change Clyde's life forever. A fire burned within Clyde, fueled by a desire for justice and revenge. He knew he couldn't let these outlaws roam free, terrorizing others as they had terrorized him. His hands clenched into fists as memories of his family's tragedy flooded his mind. Determined, Clyde stepped out into the fading light of day, the poster of Brian Carter etched into his memory. He knew that many other bounty hunters would be after that reward, but Clyde was driven by a personal vendetta. He wouldn't rest until justice was served. As he made his way through the town, Clyde caught sight of another bounty hunter, a wiry figure with a sneer plastered across his face. The man held a wanted poster for the Bones Gang, reward of $40,000 tempting the less scrupulous souls. Their eyes met, and the tension in the air was palpable. The other bounty hunter sauntered towards Clyde, a hand resting casually on the hilt of his revolver. Well, what do we have here? Fancy your chances at that reward, stranger?" Clyde's voice was steady, laced with determination. "I've got my eyes set on Brian Carter. But I won't hesitate to take down any of the Bones Gang that gets in my way." A crooked grin twisted the bounty hunter's face. "You're a bold one. We'll see if you can back up those words." With a swift motion, he drew his revolver, the metallic click echoing through the tense silence. As the first rays of moonlight illuminated the deserted street, Clyde and the bounty hunter faced each other, their eyes locked in a deadly duel of wills. The sound of a distant tumbleweed rolling by was the only sign of life in the deserted town. The stage was set, and the lone survivor was about to make his first move in the relentless pursuit of justice. This gun had been his loyal companion through countless encounters, a symbol of his determination for justice. Clad in rugged attire, Clyde wore a well-worn leather gun holster slung low on his hip, allowing for a swift and efficient draw. The holster had seen its fair share of action, with scuff marks and faded stains bearing witness to past confrontations. It was a testament to his experience and resilience in the face of danger. The nameless bounty hunter, dressed in a dusty black duster, exuded an air of danger. His weathered face bore the scars of previous battles, a testament to a life lived on the edge. His eyes, as cold and unforgiving as the barrel of a gun, locked onto Clyde's with a mix of hostility and determination. His unkempt hair and unshaven face hinted at a life spent chasing bounties and surviving on the fringes of society. As tension filled the air, both men prepared for the inevitable duel, each driven by their own motivations. The weight of past decisions and the consequences of their actions hung heavy in the moment, fueling the intensity of the impending clash. Chapter 2: The Seasoned Gunslinger. Gunfire erupted in the deserted street of Dusty Creek as Clyde's hand moved like lightning, his aim true. The other bounty hunter, caught off guard by Clyde's speed and accuracy, fell to the ground in a cloud of dust, his revolver slipping from his lifeless fingers. Clyde stood there, his heart pounding, as the realization of what he had just done settled in. He holstered his weapon, knowing that this was just the beginning of the battles he would face on his quest for vengeance. Clyde spun his gun and dropped it back into his holster and started slowly walking over to the nameless bounty hunter's body slumped on the ground. The sound of creaking wood from a loose salon door as he passed and neared the dead man. Clyde leaned down and took the rolled-up wanted poster from inside the nameless one's jacket and unrolled it. The wanted poster had a bullet hole right through Brain's head. The rest of his gang stood aside him on their horses. Clyde smiled to himself and rolled the poster up and away again and tucked it in his inner pocket, then walked back to the bar. Meanwhile, in the smoky interior of the saloon, Frank leaned against the bar, nursing a glass of whiskey. His sharp eyes had caught the commotion outside, and he watched the aftermath of the duel with a detached interest. Frank was no stranger to the violence that permeated the Wild West, having weathered countless showdowns and walked away unscathed. As Clyde stepped into the saloon, his dusty boots leaving marks on the wooden floor, he caught Frank's gaze. Their eyes met briefly, a mutual understanding passing between them. Frank recognized the fire in Clyde's eyes, a fire that burned with a singular purpose, a purpose Frank knew all too well. The saloon was abuzz with activity, the air thick with the scent of tobacco and the sound of laughter mingling with clinking glasses. Clyde scanned the room, his senses sharpened by the events of the day. He overheard snippets of conversation, catching whispers about the notorious Bones gang. Eager to gather information, Clyde sidled up to the bar, his presence commanding attention. He ordered a drink, his gaze darting around the room as he listened for any valuable tidbits of knowledge. A grizzled old miner, his face weathered by years spent in the harsh wilderness, leaned against the bar next to Clyde. The miner's voice was rough, tinged with a hint of excitement as he spoke to the bartender. "Did you hear? The Bones gang is rumored to be planning their biggest heist yet. They are targeting a shipment of gold that's due to pass through these parts. It's said to be heavily guarded." Clyde's ears perked up at the mention of the Bones gang's plans. He knew he had to find a way to intercept them before they could carry out their audacious scheme. His mind raced with strategies and possibilities, each thought bringing him closer to his ultimate goal. Unbeknownst to Clyde, Frank continued to observe him from the shadows of the saloon. He recognized the fire burning within Clyde, the determination that mirrored his own. Frank had seen countless men driven by revenge, their hearts consumed by darkness. But something about Clyde intrigued him, a flicker of empathy buried deep within his hardened soul. As the night wore on, Clyde and Frank remained in the saloon, their paths entwined by destiny and the pursuit of justice. They exchanged fleeting glances, their unspoken connection strengthening with each passing moment. Little did they know that their paths were about to converge in a way neither of them could have anticipated. The hunt for the Bones Gang was just beginning, and the Wild West would bear witness to the clash of two formidable gunslingers. As the night wore on, the saloon became livelier, the raucous laughter and clinking of glasses filling the air. Clyde and Frank found themselves sitting at adjacent tables, each lost in their own thoughts, yet aware of the other's presence. Clyde's eyes wandered over the room, studying the faces of the patrons, searching for any signs of the Bones Gang or potential allies in his quest. The flickering lanterns cast an amber glow on the worn faces of miners, cowboys, and gamblers who had sought solace and excitement within the saloon's walls. In a corner of the room, a boisterous poker game was underway. Clyde caught snippets of conversation, whispers of rumors that echoed through the haze of smoke. The mention of a large gold shipment and the words, Bones Gang, piqued his interest. He discreetly edged closer, straining to eavesdrop on their discussion. Frank, on the other hand, leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the room with a practiced vigilance. He observed the various players, noting their movements and the hidden stories etched on their faces. The air was heavy with anticipation, a tangible energy that signaled something significant was about to unfold. As Clyde listened intently, a rugged cowboy with a worn Stetson caught his eye. The cowboy's weathered features hinted at a life spent under the scorching sun. Clyde recognized the look of a man who had faced adversity head-on. Seizing the opportunity, Clyde approached the cowboy and leaned against the bar, striking up a casual conversation. "Evening, partner. Mind if I join you for a drink?" The cowboy nodded, offering a curt smile. "No harm in sharing a drink. Name's Jed." "Clyde," he replied, raising his glass in acknowledgement. "So, Jed, you ever heard anything about the Bones Gang around these parts?" Jed took a long swig of his whiskey, his eyes glimmering with a mix of caution and curiosity. I've heard whispers. They're rumored to be planning their biggest heist yet, targeting a shipment of gold that's passing through these lands. But mark my words, they ain't ones to mess with." Clyde's jaw tightened, the desire for justice burning in his eyes. "I aim to make them pay for what they did, Jed. Any chance you might know where I can find them?" Jed paused for a moment, his gaze scanning the room before leaning in closer to Clyde. "Word is, they've been seen camped near Deadman's Pass, a treacherous stretch of land not too far from here. But be careful, friend. The Bones Gang is ruthless, and they won't hesitate to spill blood." Clyde nodded, a steely resolve shining in his eyes. "Thanks for the tip, Jed. I won't forget this." As the night wore on, Clyde and Frank exchanged occasional glances, their silent understanding growing stronger. They were two lone wolves on the hunt, their paths destined to intertwine in the pursuit of justice. Outside the saloon, the winds howled, carrying with them the whispers of fate. The Wild West was about to bear witness to a showdown unlike any other, where the lines between law and vengeance would blur and the choices made would reverberate through the annals of history. The saloon's atmosphere grew charged with an undercurrent of anticipation as the night wore on. Clyde and Frank, both aware of the other's presence, remained immersed in their own thoughts, their paths on the verge of converging. Clyde's eyes flickered towards Frank, studying the seasoned gunslinger from a distance. Frank exuded an aura of quiet confidence, his weathered face a canvas of countless battles fought and won. Clyde couldn't help but admire the man's skill and experience, sensing a kindred spirit beneath the hardened exterior. As Clyde nursed his drink, commotion erupted at one end of the saloon. The swinging doors swung open, revealing a group of rowdy cowboys stumbling in, their laughter ringing through the air. Among them was Doug Walters, a hulking figure with a reputation for ruthless brutality. Doug's eyes scanned the room, the glint of mischief in his gaze as he sized up the patrons. His gaze landed on Clyde, a spark of recognition igniting within his cold, calculating eyes. Clyde's hand instinctively moved toward his holster, ready to defend himself if necessary. However, before tensions could escalate, Doug's attention shifted to a lively poker game in the corner. He nudged his companions, his voice laced with mischief. "Looks like our luck's about to change, boys. Let's join in on the action." Clyde took this opportunity to observe the interaction, his senses heightened. He couldn't help but notice the camaraderie among the members of the Bones gang, their unspoken language and shared history evident in their every move. Frank, ever the astute observer, had also taken notice of the gang's arrival. His keen eyes studied each member, committing their faces to memory. He recognized the dangers they posed, their reputation well deserved. As the night progressed, the Bones gang indulged in revelry, their laughter and boisterous voices filling the saloon. Their presence became a reminder of the impending danger Clyde and Frank faced, fueling their resolve to bring these outlaws to justice. Clyde's gaze shifted back to Frank, his eyes conveying a silent message, a message of unity in their shared pursuit. There was an unspoken understanding between them, recognition that their paths were destined to intertwine in this treacherous game of cat and mouse. With the tension mounting, Clyde made a decision. He approached the poker table where the Bones gang was engrossed in their game, a mask of confidence concealing the fire burning within. Clyde's purpose was twofold: gather information and test the boundaries of these ruthless outlaws. Pulling up a chair, Clyde took a seat at the table, his gaze meeting Doug's with unwavering determination. "Mind if I join you, gentlemen?" Doug eyed Clyde, a mixture of amusement and curiosity in his eyes. He leaned back, his voice laced with a hint of challenge. Well, what do we have here? A brave soul stepping into the lion's den. Sure, take a seat. Let's see if you can handle the heat." As the cards were dealt and the game unfolded, Clyde's mind raced, his senses attuned to every detail. He engaged in casual banter with the gang members, extracting tidbits of information while concealing his true intentions. Meanwhile, Frank watched the proceedings from a distance, his eyes trained on Clyde. He recognized the audacity and cunning behind Clyde's actions, admiring the younger bounty hunter's ability to navigate the dangerous territory of the Bones gang. In the heart of the saloon, amidst the clatter of chips and the flickering glow of lanterns, the fates of Clyde and Frank drew closer. Their shared pursuit of justice had brought them to this pivotal moment, where alliances would be formed, and the Wild West would witness the clash of relentless determination against ruthless savagery. The tension in the saloon mounted as Clyde skillfully played his hand, his poker face betraying nothing but cool confidence. The Bones gang members watched him closely, their expressions a mix of curiosity and suspicion. As the game progressed, Clyde subtly steered the conversation towards the topic of the Bones gang's recent activities. He probed for information, his words carefully chosen to avoid raising suspicion. The gang, fueled by whiskey and bravado, let slip small details about their plans and their leader, Brian Carter. Only two members of the Bones gang were here tonight, Doug and Fred, with two hangers-on who likely wanted to look tough to the locals by hanging with members of the Bones gang for a while. Sitting at the bar, Frank's gaze never wavered from the unfolding scene. He saw Clyde's deft maneuvers and his deliberate attempts to extract crucial information. Frank admired the younger bounty hunter's strategy, recognizing his determination to bring down the infamous Bones gang. Doug, the imposing figurehead of the gang, leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he studied Clyde. A slow, cunning smile crept across his face, revealing his enjoyment of the high-stakes game at hand. He had a reputation for being perceptive, and he sensed there was more to Clyde than met the eye. "You've got some nerve, stranger," Doug remarked, his voice dripping with smugness. "But I reckon you're not just here for a friendly game of poker. What's your real game, huh?" Clyde's gaze met Doug's, a steely resolve burning in his eyes. "Let's just say I have a vested interest in the Bones gang. They've caused a lot of pain, and it's time someone made them pay." The gang members Doug and Fred exchanged knowing glances, their expressions hardening. Clyde's words struck a nerve, unearthing buried memories and igniting a flicker of recognition in some of their eyes. "Doug, a hardened and long-time member of the Bones gang, glanced at Clyde. A spark of curiosity glinting in his gaze, sensing the mounting tension, the saloon fell into an uneasy silence. The patrons could feel the electricity in the air, the palpable clash between two forces on a collision course. Suddenly, without warning, Doug's hand shot towards his revolver. His intent was clear, questioning Clyde's loyalty with a duel, a test of skill and survival. The saloon erupted into chaos as people scrambled to clear the area, creating a circle for the impending showdown. Clyde's hand hovered over his own gun, his eyes narrowing with unwavering determination. He knew this duel was more than just a test of skill, it was a pivotal moment that could determine the course of his vendetta against the Bones gang. Their eyes locked, Clyde and Doug exchanged a few tense words, their voices laced with a dangerous mix of bravado and quiet resolve. The saloon fell into an expectant silence, the only sound cutting through the air being the creaking of leather and the whispers of fate. In one swift motion, the dueling pistols were drawn, their barrels aimed with deadly intent. The crowd held their breath as the seconds stretched into eternity. Then, with lightning speed, the gunshots rang out, shattering the stillness. Time seemed to stand still as Clyde's bullet found its mark, piercing Doug's shoulder. The force of the impact sent him sprawling to the floor, his own shot flying wide. Clyde stood there, his chest heaving, the taste of victory mingling with the acrid scent of gunpowder. The duel had been won, a testament to his skill and determination. He cast a steely gaze across the saloon, his eyes meeting Frank's once again. Freed and his two hangers-on slowly backed off. Fred had his hand just above his gun holster and exited through the saloon doors, with his two frightened friends. Frank nodded, silent acknowledgement passing between them. The hunt for the Bones gang had taken an unexpected turn, and together they would chart a course through treacherous territory. As their paths converged, their fates intertwined, they embarked on a dangerous journey towards justice in the untamed Wild West. Chapter 3, A Pivotal Encounter. The saloon erupted in a mix of cheers and startled gasps as the smoke from the duel lingered in the air. Clyde, adrenaline coursing through his veins, holstered his gun with practiced ease. His gaze shifted from the fallen Doug to the stunned members of the Bones gang. Amidst the chaos, Frank emerged from the shadows, his eyes fixed on Clyde. There was a flicker of admiration in Frank's gaze, a silent acknowledgement of the younger bounty hunter's skill and determination. The two men shared a brief nod, an unspoken agreement forming between them. With the dust settling, the saloon gradually returned to its raucous state, albeit with an undercurrent of tension. The Bones gang, momentarily stunned by the unexpected turn of events, exchanged glances laden with uncertainty and anger. Clyde, aware of the brewing storm, maintained a calm facade as he approached the bar. He ordered a drink, the amber liquid providing a momentary respite from the chaos that surrounded him. As he sipped, his gaze wandered, landing on the body of Doug, the notorious member of the Bones gang. A local young man approached Clyde and offered to wrap the body and take it for the bounty for a percentage of the reward. Clyde offered the guy $500 and he accepted. Clyde leaned on the bar and ordered a drink. In the corner of the saloon, Frank leaned against a wooden pillar, his eyes keenly surveying the scene. He understood Clyde's need for patience, for careful planning. The pursuit of justice required strategy, and Frank was willing to play the long game, A young woman sat at the piano while a man next to her asked her to play a tune. So the piano music began and people started quietly chatting. As the night wore on, the atmosphere in the saloon remained charged with an unspoken tension. The Bones Gang members, fueled by their wounded pride, would be out there somewhere together, like a pack of wolves plotting their next move. Clyde asked around in the bar, seizing the opportunity to gather more information. He discreetly approached the locals, engaging in hushed conversations, coaxing whispers of the Bones Gang's recent activities. The town's whispers revealed whispers of potential hideouts, secret rendezvous points, and the gang's uncanny ability to evade capture. Outside the saloon, the night grew darker, casting an ominous shadow over the town of Dusty Creek. The echoes of the past reverberated through its streets, intertwining with the present, creating a tapestry of destiny and revenge. The saloon hummed with an undercurrent of anticipation as Clyde and Frank continued their separate investigations. Their paths converged once again when a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. The swing of the saloon doors revealed a menacing figure, Fred, a member of the Bones Gang, his eyes glinting with a dangerous resolve. His gaze locked onto Frank, recognizing him as a formidable adversary. The tension in the room escalated as the air thickened with the scent of imminent conflict. Fred's eyes locked onto Clyde. "You're a dead man." "You're both dead men," said Fred. Without uttering a word, Frank calmly stepped forward, his hand hovering above his trusted revolver. Fred, the gang member, mirrored his stance, his fingers twitching with a mix of fear and determination. The saloon patrons instinctively scattered, creating a ring of space, eager to witness the clash of two seasoned gunslingers. Silence descended upon the room, broken only by the faint creaking of floorboards and the pounding of hearts. Frank's eyes bore into his opponents, a reflection of years of experience and the countless duels he had survived. Fred, fueled by loyalty and a desperate desire to prove himself, met Frank's gaze with a mixture of bravado and trepidation. Time seemed to suspend as the seconds stretched into an eternity. In that fleeting moment, the Wild West held its breath, as if nature itself recognized the gravity of the impending duel. "Remember, Alice," Frank said. "Fred, there doesn't have to be any more killing here tonight," replied Frank calmly. Silence filled the room held by the tension. Fred spat on the floor. "You're right, not here anyway." Fred moved his hand slowly away from his gun and stepped back to leave the saloon. "But how are you and your friend going to sleep tonight?" "I wonder," said Fred, backing out of the salon doors with his two hangers-on beside him. "Good night, boys," said Fred as he left, his two friends laughing alongside him as they left the bar with him. Silence settled over the saloon, broken only by the distant howling wind, as the saloon gradually returned to its previous state of revelry. A new wave of tension settled over the room. The Bones Gang members, witnessing the downfall of their comrade, would no doubt be close by somewhere planning a revenge attack. Clyde and Frank, each having their own battles, locked eyes once more. They understood that the road ahead would be treacherous and fraught with danger. But they also knew that their combined determination and skills would be their greatest assets in the pursuit of the Bones Gang. "Listen, kid, this might be our last night, so let's drink to it," Frank said, holding his glass up to Clyde at the bar. "Don't worry about it, I don't think they'll attack tonight," said Jed, approaching Clyde and Frank at the bar. "What makes you think that?" said Frank, frowning. "They've got a train to catch, remember," smiled Jed, and then taking a drink he put his glass down. "If you guys need any help." Clyde looked Jed over and then looked to Frank. Frank and Clyde exchanged glances, then Clyde faced Jed again. "Thanks, Jed, but I think we can manage this one ourselves." Clyde leaned back on the bar to drink. "But I'm a decent shooter," said Jed. Frank smiled from behind his whiskey glass, amused by the youngsters' enthusiasm to join in their dangerous pursuit. "Listen, kid, it's better to stay safe than trying to be the hero. I don't want anyone on my conscience," said Clyde, Jed seemed a bit disappointed that he couldn't join them and walked away to sit at a table on his own. Frank glanced at Clyde and looked him over, thinking to himself, wondering if Jed could be of any use, you know. Maybe you should take your own advice, said Frank. Clyde slowly turned to face Frank. What do I mean? It's better to be safe than trying to be the hero, said Frank. I can do this on my own. I don't need anyone's help, said Clyde, leaning on the bar. Sure, said Frank before taking a drink of whiskey. Clyde gave Frank a look, then Frank spoke. All I'm saying is, you might stand more chance against the Gand if you got me. Frank looks over to Jed sat alone at a table and says, and Jed as back up. Frank turned back round and leaned on the bar. How do I know I can trust you? Or trust Jed not to slip or miss? Clyde asked Frank, and Frank didn't seem to have any answers. I've been let down too many times before, mister, said Clyde. I'm sure you have, kid, said Frank, and was interrupted by Clyde saying, and don't call me kid. Frank leaned back in his chair. So what's your name? My name is Frank, said Frank. Clyde quietly spoke. Clyde, but don't use my name here. Okay, nice to meet you. How many men have you shot, kid? Said Frank, pouring himself another drink. You look like you can handle yourself well. I bet you shot a lot of people already. Frank was beginning to slur a little when talking. Clyde didn't answer and was leaning thoughtfully on the bar. I lost count, after about 100, but I reckon it could be 150 men, at least, said Frank, putting the cap back on his bottle. Clyde was taken aback by how many men Frank had shot in his time, and he took his time to reply. 5. Said Clyde. 5. Well, that's still cold. Do you remember how you felt after the first one? What were you thinking after? Frank took a drink of his whiskey. Clyde was lost in though for a while and didn't answer Frank directly. I took a lot of men in alive, said Clyde. It's nice when that they come nicely these days. I could never do that. It never seemed possible, said Frank. I never wanted to kill a man. I would rather they were took in alive and given a trail and a chance, said Clyde with a sense of honor and morals. Frank wobbled about, putting his glass back on the bar. I never wanted to either, but I couldn't risk it. Most these men would put a bullet in me without even thinking about it, back then. And these Bones gang are like that. The Carters are mean gunslingers, my friend. Fred and Harry are also notorious killers. You've been very lucky tonight, Frank said. Clyde adjusted himself against the bar, observing Frank. You need to slow down with the whiskey, my friend, said Frank. I wonder how many men Jed has shot. Shall we ask him? Frank gestured with his hand to get Jed's attention. Hey Jed, come over here. Have a drink with us, said Frank. Jed stood upon his denim dungarees and walked over toward Frank and Clyde. How many men have you shot, Jed? Said Frank. I shot 2 men who were beating on my gran. I shot them dead last year, said Jed as he took a drink offered from Frank. What did it feel like, Jed? Said Frank. I felt good. I felt relieved. These guy had already beaten on her and my granddad, so I had to do something, said Jed. You did the right thing, Jed, said Frank. Yeah, enjoy your drink, said Clyde. There's no real law or justice out here, is there, Jed? And sometimes we gotta do what have to, said Frank. I shot another man, said Jed. Frank put his glass down in amazement, wanting to hear Jed's account. He was stealing a horse from our farm. I warned him, but he pulled his gun. I had to shoot him. Jed sounded upset when he spoke, almost crying. Frank sat facing Jed and his eye began to gather tears. It's all right, Jed. You did what you had to. Frank seemed a bit down now, as if Jed's stories had stirred something in his own memories. Frank broke down sobbing, and in the end it was Jed reassuring Frank. Jed held Frank as Frank sobbed. He had a family, 2 children, and I told him, don't do it. Don't you dare, Frank sobbed. Can't we find him a room? Clyde said to Jed. Jed asked the barman if he had a room, but Frank stood up and wiped his face. I'm okay, it's all right, he said, and the barman returned to his work. So are we in this together? Frank looked at Clyde and Jed. Clyde nodded. But we play it my way, Frank asked. So what's the plan? We interrupt their robbery, said Clyde, and the 3 of them smiled at each other before taking a drink. In the depths of Dusty Creek, the plan was set in motion, fueled by a thirst for justice and a desire to confront the demons of their past. The lone survivor and the seasoned gunslinger would forge an alliance born out of tragedy, with Jed helping them out as they ventured deeper into the heart of the Wild West. Chapter 4: The Gathering Storm, Part 1. In the aftermath of their separate encounters, Clyde and Frank found themselves drawn together by a common purpose: capturing Brian Carter and dismantling the infamous Bones Gang. Their paths converged in Dusty Creek, a small town teetering on the edge of lawlessness. Wary gazes met as Clyde and Frank assessed each other, their hardened expressions a reflection of the dangers they had faced. Jed alongside them on his horse listening quietly. Though strangers, they understood the value of collaboration in a land where justice was scarce. A tense silence lingered between them, each man weighing the risks and benefits of forging an alliance. Clyde, his eyes betraying a flicker of vulnerability, broke the silence. "I've been hunting the Bones Gang for years," he confessed, his voice laced with a mix of determination and pain. "They took everything from me, a family I'll never see again. I want justice, and I won't rest until Brian Carter pays for his crimes." Frank's piercing gaze softened for a moment, acknowledging the weight of Clyde's words. "I understand your thirst for justice," he replied, his voice steady and resolute. "We both have our reasons for pursuing Carter and his gang. If we join forces, our chances of success increase. Together, we can bring them down." Jed, sensing the somber mood, interjected with a hint of optimism. "Hey, Mr. Wilson might have a map we could use," he suggested, his voice eager. "We should swing by his place first. It might give us an edge in tracking the gang." Clyde's face remained stoic, his mind consumed by thoughts of revenge. "We can't afford to waste time," he retorted, mounting his horse with a sense of urgency. "We need to catch up with the Bones Gang before they slip away." Undeterred, Jed darted off, promising to return shortly. Clyde and Frank exchanged a cautious glance, silently acknowledging the unspoken trust that had begun to form between them. A few minutes later, Jed reappeared, holding a rolled-up map in his hand. "Look, it's a shortcut," Jed exclaimed, unrolling the map and tracing his finger along a rugged path. "If we cut through Deadman's Pass, we can save a lot of time. It'll lead us right to their hideout." A glimmer of admiration flickered in Clyde's eyes as he regarded Jed. "Well done, Jed," he commended, his voice laced with gratitude. "That shortcut will come in handy. Let's not waste any more time. We have a gang to catch." With their spirits momentarily lifted by the prospect of a strategic advantage, the trio set off, their horses galloping through the untamed wilderness. The journey ahead was treacherous, but with determination fueling their every step. They rode on, ready to face the gathering storm that awaited them. Frank studied Clyde, recognizing the raw determination that burned within him. The seasoned gunslinger knew the weight of revenge and the toll it took on a man's soul. With a nod, he acknowledged Clyde's words, his own resolve strengthening. "You're not alone in seeking justice," Frank replied, his voice steady and unwavering. "The Bones Gang has left a trail of blood and destruction in their wake. They need to be stopped, and I aim to see it done." A glimmer of understanding passed between them, an unspoken agreement that their combined skills and determination could tip the scales in their favor. As tension loosened its grip, an uneasy alliance began to take shape, like the gathering storm on the horizon. Together, with Jed at their side, Clyde and Frank strategized, pooling their knowledge and resources. They delved into the depths of Dusty Creek, seeking information from the locals, whispers of the gang's hideouts, their latest escapades, and the vulnerabilities that could be exploited. In this fragile alliance, trust was a precious commodity, built on shared experiences and the mutual understanding of loss and the pursuit of justice. As Clyde opened up to Frank, he revealed the haunting Memories that fueled his relentless pursuit. I was just a young boy when the Bones gang swept through our homestead, Clyde confided, his voice tinged with a mix of sorrow and rage. I witnessed the brutal murder of my family, left to carry that pain with me every day since. It's why I've dedicated my life to hunting them down. Frank listened, his eyes holding a depth of empathy that only a man who had stared into the abyss of darkness could truly understand. He recognized the unyielding fire within Clyde, a fire that mirrored his own. We carry the weight of our pasts, Frank replied, his voice filled with a hardened resolve. But together, we have a chance to confront those demons. To bring justice to those who have evaded it for far too long. Their shared understanding deepened the bond between them, solidifying their alliance. They knew the road ahead would be treacherous, with dangers lurking in every shadow. But united, they stood a chance against the formidable Bones gang. As the day unfolded, they saddled their horses and began traveling in pursuit of the Bones gang. The storm clouds gathered, both in the skies above and within the hearts of Clyde and Frank, and also Jed. Their quest for justice burned brighter, propelling them further into the heart of the Wild West, where their destinies would intertwine with those of the Bones gang as the sun dipped below the horizon. Casting an amber glow over Dusty Creek, Clyde and Frank set their plan into motion. The alliance they forged began to take shape, their shared determination fueling their every step. Before reaching their shortcut path, Clyde slowed down and got off his horse. Jed and Frank slowed their horses down and watched as Clyde pointed at the map and said, "This is our shortcut, we've got about 2 hours to get across here." The gang has a preference for isolated locations, Clyde remarked, pointing at a particular spot on the map. They'll seek refuge in the old abandoned mine of town. It's a treacherous place, but it offers them the seclusion they crave. Frank nodded, his eyes narrowing with determination. We strike when they least expect it. The cover of darkness will be our ally. We'll catch them off guard, disrupt their operations, and ensure they pay for the lives they've taken. Their plan began to take shape, a daring raid on the gang's hideout, a clash between justice and lawlessness. Clyde's desire for revenge fused with Frank's steadfast pursuit of bringing outlaws to justice. The two bounty hunters, once strangers, had become brothers in arms. As the moon ascended into the night sky, casting its ethereal glow over Dusty Creek, Clyde and Frank readied themselves for the impending confrontation. They strapped on their holsters, checking their weapons with a practiced hand. Clyde got back on his horse and they galloped along the dirt track shortcut route. Clyde's gaze met Frank's, a shared understanding passing between them. They knew that the battle ahead would be perilous, testing their mettle and their resolve. But they were prepared to face the storm head-on, united in purpose. With a determined nod, Clyde, Frank and Jed on their horses galloped out into the night. They were shadows in the moonlight, guided by the pursuit of justice, driven by the ghosts of their past. The gathering storm had reached its peak, crackling with the promise of reckoning. The lone survivor and the seasoned gunslinger, with Jed, were ready to face the darkness that awaited them, armed with their skills, their resolve, and the knowledge that they were not alone. Clyde, Frank, and Jed continued their swift gallop along the dirt track, their horses kicking up clouds of dust in their wake. As they neared a picturesque farmhouse nestled among rolling hills, a figure emerged from the front gate, clutching a shotgun tightly in his hands. The trio sensed the tension in the air and slowed their horses upon Frank's signal. With a calm yet commanding voice, Frank raised his hand in a gesture of peace. "Don't shoot. Put your gun down," he called out, projecting his voice to ensure he was heard. "We're just passing through these parts, sir. We don't mean any disturbance." The man eyed them cautiously, his weathered face etched with suspicion. "Who are you?" he grumbled, his grip on the shotgun unwavering. "We're looking for the Bones gang," Frank replied, his tone earnest. "Word is they're over the hill yonder, about to pull off a train robbery. We aim to stop them." The man remained skeptical, his gaze shifting from one rider to another. "Don't be trying no funny business," he warned, keeping his shotgun pointed in their direction. "You go by slowly and keep your hands up, you hear me?" Understanding the gravity of the situation, the trio complied, bringing their horses to a cautious halt and raising their hands in the air. As they passed the farmstead, they observed the rustic charm of the old farmhouse, its time-worn wooden beams reflecting years of hard work and toil. The surrounding land stretched out in a patchwork of verdant fields and grazing cattle, a testament to the beauty of rural life. Jed, his voice trembling with nervousness, couldn't resist a question. "You're not gonna shoot at us, he asked, his eyes darting nervously between the man and his shotgun. The man's stern expression softened slightly, revealing a glimmer of weary resignation. "You boys just move on by, you hear me? And don't come this way again," he warned, emphasizing his words with a stern gaze. "Okay, sir. We won't bother you again." Assured, his voice filled with a mixture of respect and understanding. "You better not," the man retorted firmly, his grip on the shotgun loosening slightly as they put some distance between them. With a collective sigh of relief, Clyde, Frank, and Jed continued on their journey, the encounter serving as a stark reminder of the treacherous road ahead. As the farmhouse faded into the distance, they pushed forward, their resolve strengthened by the knowledge that the Bones gang was just over the hill, waiting to be brought to justice. Together, they would strike at the heart of the Bones gang, unraveling the tapestry of violence and revenge that had plagued their lives for far too long. The storm had arrived, and it was time for Clyde and Frank to unleash its fury. Chapter 5, The Train Robbery, Part 1. The moon's pale light illuminated the rugged features of the Bones gang as they gathered near Deadman's Pass, an ominous setting that matched their nefarious intentions. Brian Carter, the imposing leader with a rugged beard and a worn leather hat, exuded a menacing presence. Dressed in a tattered black duster coat and a wide-brimmed hat, he exuded an air of calculated danger. Beside Brian, George, a wiry and scrappy individual with a scar running across his cheek, eagerly discussed the final intricacies of their plan. He adjusted his worn leather gloves, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Remember, no mistakes. We take down the guards, grab the loot, and disappear like smoke," George advised with a hint of cunning in his voice. Meanwhile, Harry, one of the oldest and largest members of the gang, towered over the others with a massive frame and a bushy beard that concealed his weathered face. He leaned against a tree, his muscular arms crossed, exuding an aura of quiet strength. Clad in a vest adorned with bullet casings and a worn-out Stetson hat, he possessed a commanding presence. "Keep your eyes sharp, boys. We ain't leaving empty-handed," Harry rumbled, his deep voice resonating with authority. Reg, a tall and muscular figure with a weathered face, stood nearby, meticulously inspecting his double-barreled shotgun. He wore a worn leather jacket adorned with bullet holes, a testament to his numerous encounters. With a nod of approval, he locked eyes with Brian. "I've been itching for a good fight," Reg grumbled, his gravelly voice betraying his eagerness to unleash chaos upon their unsuspecting victims. Fred, the lanky and quick-witted member of the gang, adjusted his worn bandana and sharpened the edges of his throwing knives. Dressed in a faded denim jacket adorned with patches of various outlaw insignias, he possessed a mischievous charm. "Remember, boys, stay alert. We don't want any surprises ruining our payday," Fred cautioned, his voice dripping with a mix of confidence and caution. Brian, his eyes glinting with a mix of authority and determination, placed a reassuring hand on Harry's broad shoulder. "We've planned this meticulously, Harry. Trust in our skills. Today, we make our mark," Brian declared, his words carrying a sense of conviction that resonated with the entire gang. With their weapons primed and their minds set on the impending heist, the Bones gang awaited the arrival of the train, their hearts pounding with a heady mix of excitement and trepidation. The stage was set for their audacious act of lawlessness, and the West trembled in anticipation of their next move. Meanwhile, Clyde and Frank, having gathered crucial information about the gang's activities, found themselves on the outskirts of the rugged canyon. They had learned of the train's impending arrival, carrying a valuable cargo that the Bones gang coveted. Clyde's jaw clenched as Frank handed him his monocular telescope and he watched the gang from a hidden vantage point. The sight of Brian Carter fueled his burning desire for revenge, his heart heavy with memories of the day that had forever changed his life. The time for reckoning was drawing near. Frank, standing beside Clyde, studied the gang intently. His gaze narrowed, assessing their strengths and weaknesses. He knew that capturing Brian Carter and bringing down the Bones gang required precision and timing. Every move had to be calculated, every shot counted. "What you like at long range, kidder?" Frank said to Jed. I ain't got no experience at that, sir. I've only used a shotgun at close range." "Rep," I Jed after tying his horse to a nearby tree, then joining Frank and Clyde in the view. "Best stick to what you know. Here, take a look at the territory and get familiar with it," Frank said, handing the telescope to Jed. Jed keenly scanned the area, taking note. 5 horses tied there. They must have found someone to replace Doug. There could be more of them, but I think we're up against 5 men, said Clyde, as the sun dipped below the horizon, signaling the approach of dusk. The Bones gang made their final preparations. They mounted their horses and rode toward the designated spot where the train would soon pass. It was a treacherous section of track, nestled within the unforgiving embrace of Deadman's Pass. Clyde and Frank exchanged a glance, an unspoken understanding passing between them. The time had come to intervene, to disrupt the gang's nefarious plans. Their fates were intertwined, bound by a shared purpose to bring justice to the lawless land they roamed. With quiet determination, Clyde, Frank, and began their descent into Deadman's Pass. The 3 of them left their roses tied loosely at the top. The rocky terrain challenged their every step, but their resolve remained unyielding. They moved with purpose, their eyes fixed on the train tracks that snaked through the canyon. The sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed through the stillness, accompanied by the distant whistle of the approaching train. Clyde and Frank quickened their pace, their hearts pounding in sync with the rhythmic chugging of the locomotive. A gust of wind swept through the canyon, carrying with it a sense of anticipation. The stage was set for a clash between justice and lawlessness, a battle that would test the mettle of both Clyde and Frank. It was a duel that had been years in the making, a convergence of destinies that would shape their lives forever. Clyde and Frank approached the outskirts of Deadman's Pass, with Jed just behind them, their footsteps muffled by the crunch of gravel beneath their boots. The canyon walls loomed above them, casting elongated shadows that danced in the fading light. As they reached a vantage point overlooking the train tracks, their eyes widened at the sight below. The Bones gang had positioned themselves strategically, ready to strike as the train thundered through the narrow passage. Clyde's grip tightened on his revolver, his knuckles turning white. Memories of his family's tragic demise surged through his mind, fueling his determination to bring the gang to justice. He shared a determined glance with Frank, a silent agreement passing between them. The distant rumble grew louder, signaling the approaching train. Clyde and Frank crouched low, blending into the rocky terrain, their focus fixed on the unfolding scene below. As the train roared into view, the Bones gang sprang into action. Brian Carter, his eyes burning with a mixture of greed and adrenaline, signaled his cohorts to unleash chaos. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the canyon like thunder. Clyde and Frank waited for the opportune moment to make their move. They assessed the gang's positions, seeking vulnerabilities amidst the mayhem. The dust kicked up by the galloping horses and the acrid scent of gunpowder filled the air. With a swift nod, Clyde and Frank descended from their hiding spot, their guns drawn and their senses honed. The deafening sound of gunfire filled the air as the bullets flew in all directions. They weaved through the pandemonium, their movements fluid and calculated, each taking down gang members with deadly precision. Amidst the chaos, Jed, his left shoulder throbbing with pain, mustered up the courage and determination to retaliate. Gritting his teeth, he aimed his revolver at Fred, who had shot him moments before. Fred, perched atop his galloping horse, brandished a sleek, silver-plated pistol with intricate engravings that gleamed in the sunlight. With a cold stare, he fired a shot, piercing Jed's flesh and causing him to wince in agony, but Jed's resilience overcame the pain. With a steady hand and a heart fueled by vengeance, he squeezed the trigger. The bullet found its mark, tearing through the air and striking Fred with a thunderous impact. A chilling scream pierced the chaotic atmosphere as Fred's body crumpled and disappeared in a cloud of dust. Amidst the turmoil, Brian's voice rose above the fray, his anger palpable. "What the hell are you doing here?" he shouted, his voice dripping with disbelief and fury. Harry, gripping his shotgun tightly, unleashed a barrage of shots towards Clyde and Frank, who sought refuge behind a large rock, their pistols clenched tightly in their hands. The Bones Gang's firepower was relentless, forcing Clyde, Frank, and Jed to hunker down, seeking cover from the onslaught. Frank, gritting his teeth in pain from a bullet lodged in his upper arm, reached for his trusty whiskey flask, taking a defiant sip to dull the ache. Jed, trembling but determined, struggled to reload his gun, his hands shaking with adrenaline. "I got one. I shot one of them dead," Jed exclaimed, his voice a mix of triumph and fear. "Well done, kid," Frank acknowledged, his voice filled with both pride and resignation. "But I don't think we're gonna get the rest of these guys today." The gunfire momentarily ceased, and Brain's menacing voice cut through the tense air. "Who do you think you're messing with, boys? You're not getting out of here alive." As the dust settled, Harry mounted his horse, and the Bones Gang, comprising Brian, George, Reg, and Harry, sat astride their steeds, their figures ominously silhouetted against the railside. The approaching train rumbled closer, its wheels screeching against the tracks. George's voice carried a hint of uncertainty as he turned to Brian, asking, "Are we still going to do the job?" Brian's anger and restlessness fueled his decision. "Yes, let's do this. We'll deal with these guys later," he declared, determination radiating from his every word. With a final warning cry, "You're dead men!" Brian spurred his horse forward, leading the Bones Gang in a thunderous charge toward the approaching train, determined to seize their ill-gotten gains. The stage was set for a harrowing confrontation, the outcome of which would forever alter the lives of all involved. Train Robbery Park. As the train rumbled closer, its iron behemoth imposing against the backdrop of the Wild West, the Bones Gang rode alongside on their steeds, their horses galloping in synchrony with the train's thunderous momentum. The gang's presence was an intimidating sight, their figures bathed in the fiery glow of the setting sunday. As the train slowed down, anticipation electrified the air. A security man, vigilant and armed with a shotgun, appeared at the door of one of the cars. He slid the door open, ready to protect the train and its precious cargo. However, before he could even react, Brain, fueled by a deadly combination of instinct and determination, swiftly aimed his revolver and pulled the trigger. The security man's lifeless body crumpled and fell out of the moving train, disappearing into the dust-laden abyss. Reg and Harry erupted into laughter, their joyous defiance echoing through the train cars. They quickly seized the opportunity, their horses skillfully maneuvering alongside the train. With deftness honed by countless heists, the gang members gracefully mounted the train. Their boots landing firmly on the metal steps, Brain and George, the orchestrators of chaos, led the way, pistols clutched firmly in their hands. As they strode through the narrow aisles of the passenger cars, fear washed over the faces of the passengers. George, his voice laced with a chilling sense of control, called out to the trembling passengers, "Stay calm, ladies and gentlemen, and nobody gets hurt." The tense atmosphere inside the train was soon punctuated by the sounds of gunfire. At the section of the train where the bags of gold were kept, two brave security men stood their ground, determined to protect their cargo. Shots rang out, echoing through the confined space. As the guards valiantly defended their post, the Bones Gang, undeterred by resistance, returned fire with lethal accuracy. The cries of anguish mingled with the chaotic symphony of gunfire as the gang members overpowered the guards. One by one, the security men fell, their lives extinguished in a whirlwind of violence. With the path cleared, the gang swiftly grabbed the bags of gold, their weight signifying the rewards of their audacious endeavor. Without hesitation, they hurled the bags out of the train, the golden treasures hurtling through the air and landing with a resounding thud on the dusty ground below. As the train sped along the tracks, the Bones gang members, their faces etched with triumph and adrenaline, leaped from the moving vehicle, their bodies seamlessly merging with the rugged terrain. The gang gathered, their eyes gleaming with the spoils of their daring escapade, as they surveyed the scene before them. Brain, his voice filled with a mix of satisfaction and anticipation, addressed his comrades. "We did it, boys. We got what we came for. Now let's make our escape and count our fortune. We'll deal with anyone who tries to stand in our way." The gang shared a moment of raucous laughter, their camaraderie solidified by their shared triumph. They mounted their horses, the wind whispering through the desert, carrying their echoes of rebellion and avarice into the vast expanse. With the stolen gold in their possession, they rode off into the fading twilight, leaving behind a trail of chaos and shattered lives. Clyde's heart pounded in his chest as he plucked a bullet from Frank's shoulder, then pressing on his wound asked Jed to rip some of his shirt to use as a bandage. Jed tore at his shirt with his knife and gave Clyde a length of material to wrap around Frank's upper arm. Clyde then tended to Jed's wound and Jed screamed while Clyde pulled the bullet out despite Frank just giving him a guzzle of his whiskey. "We can't take them on with you two wounded," said Clyde, somewhat disheartened. Frank and Jed sat in obvious pain and discomfort leaning on the rock beside them. "Damn it. Gimme a drink of that whiskey," said Clyde, and Frank handed him his flask. "I can still fight," said Jed standing up. Frank slowly stood up and looked at Clyde. "It's my left shoulder. I can still shoot," said Frank with a look of determination. "So what do we do? Do we go back up for the horses or just head there on foot?" said Jed. Clyde was lost in thought, but quickly snapped out of it. "Okay, let's get moving. We'll head there on foot. They can't be that far ahead," said Clyde, and so they started walking at speed up toward the railway line. As they got to the railway line, they could see the Bones gang not far ahead gathering around their stolen loot. Clyde, with Frank and Jed by his side, walked down the other side of the railway so the gang could not see him, a singular purpose driving him forward. It was a reckoning he had long awaited, chance to confront the man who had torn his family apart.